So we often hear about Queen Elizabeth I's reign as this glorious golden age, right? But here's the thing. It was anything but peaceful. Just bubbling under the surface, a whole series of really dangerous, deadly plots were brewing, threatening to knock her right off the throne. And they all came down to one explosive issue: religion. So yeah, let's dive into this tangled web of conspiracy.
You know, to really get a grip on all this turmoil, we have to ask one huge question. How did England's Catholics react when their new Protestant queen came in and basically turned their entire world upside down? Because their answer, well, it would shape the next 2 decades of English history.
Okay, so when Elizabeth took the throne, she inherited a country that was just torn apart by religion. I mean, her sister, Bloody Mary, had brought back Catholicism with a vengeance. Elizabeth's fix? It was called the religious settlement, and it was supposed to be a kind of middle ground. It created a Protestant church, sure, but it kept some of the old Catholic rituals. The thing is, for a lot of devout Catholics, this wasn't a compromise at all. It was an absolute disaster.
So this religious settlement, it really forced a tough choice on English Catholics. A lot of the most devout families just packed up and left the country. They went into exile rather than give up their faith. And the ones who stayed, well, they faced fines if they didn't show up to the new Protestant services. You can just imagine the tension, this quiet, simmering anger, just waiting for something to set it off.
And then, in 1568, that spark finally arrived. Mary, Queen of Scots, comes fleeing from Scotland looking for safety in England. But here's the kicker. She wasn't just any refugee. Nope, she was a Catholic queen, and she had a very strong claim to the English throne. Her arrival, it literally changed everything.
I mean, you couldn't find two people more different. They were like chalk and cheese. You've got Elizabeth, the practical Protestant queen on the throne. And then you have Mary, the passionate Catholic, who many believed was the rightful queen. So for all those unhappy English Catholics, Mary wasn't some prisoner. She was a symbol, a living, breathing alternative to Elizabeth. She was their queen in waiting.
And, well, it really didn't take long for all that hope to just explode into open rebellion. The first big challenge came from the powerful Catholic nobles up in the north. They felt like their power and, more importantly, their faith was being chipped away by Elizabeth's new government.
So, in 1569, the Earls of Westmoreland and Northumberland decided it was time to act. They pulled together an army of about 4,500 men, marched straight into the city of Durham, took over the massive cathedral, and held a Catholic mass. I mean, talk about a bold statement. That was a direct slap in the face to Elizabeth's authority. Their goal was super simple: get Elizabeth out and put Mary on the throne. But for all its drama, the rebellion just fizzled out. It didn't get enough support, and the Queen's forces shut it down fast. Elizabeth's reaction? Oh, it was swift, and it was absolutely brutal. She ordered the execution of around 800 of the rebels. This wasn't just about punishment. No way. This was about sending a cold, hard message to anyone else who might even think about defying her. And it worked. The power of those old northern nobles, it was crushed permanently.
So Elizabeth had put down the rebellion at home, but that victory just poked a very powerful bear abroad. The Pope, seeing that the Northern Earls had failed, decided to get involved himself. And he pulled out one of his biggest weapons: excommunication. For a monarch, this was a huge, devastating deal. And in 1570, Pope Pius V did it. He issued what's called a papal bull, officially excommunicating Elizabeth. He declared her a heretic, which meant that in the eyes of the Church, her Catholic subjects no longer had to obey her. Think about that. This was basically a green light from the Pope himself for rebellion. The stakes were now higher than ever before.
All right, so open rebellion had failed. But now, with the Pope's blessing, the whole game changed. The strategy shifted. The threat wasn't out in the open anymore. The fight against Elizabeth went underground, into the shadows. Now we're talking secret plots, funded and pushed by powerful enemies overseas.
And for the next 15 years or so, you start to see this really scary pattern develop. First, you have the Ridolfi plot in 1571, where an Italian banker plans a whole Spanish invasion. Then, a decade later, the Throckmorton plot tries to coordinate an invasion with both France and Spain. The goal was always the same: get Mary out of prison and onto the throne. But you can see how the methods are getting more and more desperate, until, finally, it becomes a direct plot to just assassinate Elizabeth.
For almost 20 years, Mary had been at the very center of every single threat against Elizabeth. Every plot, every conspiracy, it all came back to her. But this final, desperate plot, this one would be her last. And it was all because of the incredible cat-and-mouse game being played by Elizabeth's master spy.
Okay, so this is the really wild part. The Babington plot wasn't just discovered. It was basically managed from the inside by Elizabeth's spy master, Francis Walsingham. His network of spies was intercepting all the coded letters between Mary and the plotters. But they didn't just stop it. Oh no. They let it keep going, patiently decoding everything, waiting, until they got exactly what they needed. A letter from Mary herself, giving the thumbs up to assassinate Elizabeth. She had walked straight into the trap.
And that was the smoking gun. The evidence was rock solid, undeniable. After years and years of putting it off, Elizabeth really had no other choice. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was tried for treason and executed. The threat that she had represented for nearly 20 years was finally over.
You know, looking at this timeline, you really get a sense of how relentless this was. It all kicks off in 1568 when Mary lands in England. A year later, boom, the Northern Rebellion. The year after that, the Pope excommunicates Elizabeth, which just pours gasoline on the fire. That leads to this non-stop cascade of secret plots from 71 to 86, until it all comes to a head with Mary's execution in 1587. It was just constant, non-stop pressure on Elizabeth for 2 decades.
Now, getting rid of Mary definitely removed the biggest internal threat to Elizabeth's crown, no doubt about it. But it also made Catholic Europe, especially Spain, absolutely furious. In fact, it pretty much paved the way for the Spanish Armada. So that leaves us with a really interesting question to think about, doesn't it? Did killing her rival actually make her stronger, or did she just end up swapping one massive problem for another?